leaders step forward.
So does it really make all that much difference then if the United States pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord?
It's not just the scientific community warning us now, it's Mother Nature. Every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation.
Now to the state of emergency declared tonight in Louisiana. Tropical storm Cindy slamming into the south at this hour. It's now turned deadly. A 10-year-old boy dying because of the storm surge.
That's it right there.
Tonight, the Gulf Coast is under a tornado threat, with Cindy slowly approaching land. The leading edge of the storm filled with funnel clouds. Families on porches watching waterspouts coming ashore in Mississippi. Gusting winds toppling trees in Biloxi and along the Gulf Coast. Even a reported tornado in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Tragically, a 10-year-old boy killed in Alabama. Storm surge knocking a log onto him. A state of emergency already declared there and in Louisiana. Grand Isle already underwater. Officials urging evacuees to get out early.
We cannot stress enough the importance of avoiding high water, and that's for everyone across the state.
In New Orleans, they're hoping the flood control system's fortified after Katrina will help keep the city dry. You see this pond? This is water out of Lake Pontchartrain. That levee is all that's keeping this water out of that neighborhood. More than a half foot of rain already in Mississippi. Hundreds of roads submerged. Officials preparing for more possible rescues tonight.
You're anticipating that you're going to have to get people?
That we'll have to go in and get some people out, yes, ma'am.
The tropical season of 2017, it's been a rare one so far, even though officially, well, it just begun. There's a look at Venezuela. This was from Tropical Storm Brett, which was one of our latest tropical storms. It did cause some damage, not only in Venezuela, but as you see there, in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this season started back in April. Remember Arlene? Well, this was unusual because it was a very early storm in the season, and it didn't end there. Here's a look at Brett. Now, what was unusual about Brett is typically in June, well, we see storm origins form in the Gulf and the Caribbean, not that far to the east. There's a look at Brett's track. By the way, Brett is no longer. Now, to have two named storms at the same time in June, that would be Tropical Storm Brett and what we're dealing with now, Tropical Storm Cindy. That's pretty rare. In fact, it's only happened 3 other times, back in 1909, 1959, and 1968.
Mudslide came roaring downhill on Tuesday, ripping down trees, burying homes, and killing at least 11 people in the Guatemalan city of San Pedro Saloma. Officials say 10 of those killed were in a bus that was buried. The other fatality was inside a home. 9 people were injured. Emergency workers are still searching for survivors, although they say they're still not sure how many people are missing. Rescuer Walter Gomez says they've evacuated some 350 people. He says the area is still at risk. The death toll from the rainy season that started in May now stands at 18.
Swarm of earthquakes have hit Yellowstone National Park over the past week. The park is home to a massive supervolcano that could erupt at any time. So is the swarm warning us about a looming disaster?
Natasha, the U.S. Geological Survey has tallied up over 500 earthquakes in that area in the past week. Now, this swarm began on June 12th, and it is currently ongoing. I do want to mention that this is a supervolcano with a thick continental crust that causes large buildups of magma. And it's capable of producing a magnitude 8 eruption on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. That means the explosion could be 2,500 times larger than the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980, which is regarded as the largest and most deadly eruption in U.S. history.
An astrophysicist with Belfast Queen's University is warning all that Earth is incredibly vulnerable to an asteroid strike. That scientist is Alan Fitzsimmons, and he believes it's a case of when an asteroid collision will happen rather than if it will happen. A release about the astrophysicist and his warning notes he is highlighting the threat for Asteroid Day, a global event on June 30th. On that day in 1908, a small asteroid exploded over Tunguska in Siberia and devastated 800 square miles. Professor Fitzsimmons is warning that a similar unexpected strike in today's world could easily destroy a major city and a larger asteroid could be more dangerous. Fitzsimmons commented, Astronomers find near-Earth asteroids every day, and most are harmless. But it is still possible the next Tunguska would take us by surprise. And although we are much better at finding larger asteroids, that does us no good if we're not prepared to do something about them.
Annual Starmus Festival is underway in Norway, where renowned scientist Stephen Hawking says the human race could risk dying if we don't colonize on a new planet.
The Earth is becoming too small for us. Our physical resources are being drained at an alarming rate.
But this isn't the first time that Hawking has cautioned that a disaster happening to the planet is near. He explained that we run the chance of extinction from numerous different threats, spanning from climate change to genetically engineered viruses. It was just last month that he warned mankind may only have 100 years left on Earth.
We have given our planet the disastrous gift of climate change. Rising temperatures, reduction of the polar ice caps, deforestation, and decimation of animal species.
How do you keep track of 1.2 billion people? That is India's challenge. Take the country's benefits bill. Lots of Indians are poor and they receive all sorts of subsidies, but around a quarter of it is stolen. So a few years ago, the Indian government had an incredible idea. Why not register everybody's fingerprints and iris scans and give them a unique number which would give them Aadhaar, proof of identity. In fact, it seems almost everything is being linked to this unique number. There are issues being raised about privacy and digital security.
Senior White House advisor Jared Kushner touched down in Jerusalem on Wednesday to try to re-engage peace talks between Israel and Palestine. President Donald Trump has called it the, quote, deal of the century, and said if Kushner couldn't produce a peace deal, nobody could. But the timing of Kushner's visit isn't ideal. On Friday, an Israeli border police officer was stabbed to death by a Palestinian attacker. Kushner's first stop was to meet with the grieving family and deliver the president's condolences. Kushner then met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Hello. How are you? Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. This is an opportunity to pursue our common goals of security, prosperity, and peace. And Jared, I welcome you here in that spirit. I know of your efforts, the President's efforts, and I look forward to working with you to achieve these common goals.
Thank you. The President sends his best regards, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Netanyahu tweeted the day before about construction of a new West Bank settlement, the first in 25 years. The U.S. has long considered Jewish settlements on the Palestinian-claimed land a barrier to peace, but the Trump administration has wavered on that precedent. Kushner also visited Ramallah, the de facto capital of the Palestinian National Authority. There he met with President Mahmoud Abbas, who's increasingly unpopular among Palestinians. Abbas wants a two-state solution which would give Palestine its own territory, including the settlement area in the West Bank.
And finally, Moscow says that it is refining defenses on the western flank in response to what it calls NATO's aggressive actions. The Russian news agencies quoted Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as saying that he regards NATO's military buildup along Russian borders as proof of the anti-Moscow stance of the Western military alliance. Ties between Russia and the U.S.-led NATO alliance have reached the lowest level since the U.S. military buildup in Eastern Europe.
On Wednesday, Russia announced that a meeting planned to take place in St. Petersburg between Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov and U.S. Undersecretary of State Tom Shannon has been canceled. The announcement comes after the U.S. revealed it was expanding sanctions against Russian individuals and legal entities in a bid to force the end of the Russian occupation of Crimea. 2 Russian government officials were among 38 individuals and entities added to a list of sanctions targets whose assets will be frozen and who will be forbidden from doing business with U.S. citizens and companies. A statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry blamed the decision on sanctions for impeding the dialogue and accused Washington of neglecting to offer specifics, labeling the U.S. desire to seek common ground as being unconvincing and threatening that there will be a response, including practical retaliatory measures.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington has a great relationship with China. He made the remarks in a speech at Iowa Community College, standing beside former Iowa Governor Terry Branstad, who is also the new U.S. ambassador to Beijing. Trump's comments come just a day after he said Chinese efforts in containing DPRK's nuclear programs had failed. He tweeted, "While I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi and China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried."
The U.S. is putting new pressure on China tonight to push North Korea to change.
Following the first session of a new ministerial-level dialogue with China established by the Trump administration, held mostly behind closed doors, Secretary of State Tillerson termed North Korea the top security threat to the United States and said he told this to his Chinese visitors.
They have a diplomatic responsibility to exert much greater economic and diplomatic pressure on the regime if they want to prevent further escalation in the region.
The session followed the death this week of Otto Warmbier. The Chinese Foreign Ministry defended Beijing's service as a mediator and pledged to redouble its efforts. Even Arizona Senator John McCain, who rushed to proclaim Warmbier's death a murder by the regime of Kim Jong-un, urged a, quote, calibrated response by President Trump.
Within rocket range of the DMZ, the boundary between North and South Korea, is a whole bunch of rockets that could hit a city of 26 million people, i.e. Seoul.
A North Korean diplomat claims Pyongyang is open to suspending its nuclear and ballistic missile tests if the US meets certain preconditions. North Korea's ambassador to India, Ge Chun-yong, said in an interview with Indian media that one of those conditions is the US halting its large-scale military exercises. He said Pyongyang could freeze the country's weapons programs if Washington was willing to meet their demands. A similar agreement was struck between the two countries in 2012 when North Korea agreed to temporarily halt its nuclear missile tests in exchange for food aid from the United States. However, that deal fell apart just 2 months later when the North Korean regime launched what it claimed to be a satellite rocket.
The first time in several weeks, U.S. spy satellites have detected activity at North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site in the northeast of the country. 2 U.S. officials tell CNN that North Korea appears to be making some modifications around the tunnel entrances. They added it's not clear if the activities indicate a 6th nuclear test is imminent, but some have expressed concern Pyongyang could conduct a test on Wednesday ahead of a visit to Washington by top Chinese diplomats. The White House says Washington is closely working with Beijing to put more pressure on North Korea, adding that there have been some positive developments.
On Wednesday, Japan opened a missile defense drill to the public, a move intended to reassure the country it is ready to counter any missile attack by its neighbor, North Korea. Near Tokyo, at the Osaka Self-Defense Forces base, a PAC-3 Patriot battery was deployed and raised its missile launcher to firing position. Akinori Hanada, an Air Self-Defense Force major, told reporters, "Making this public is a way to reassure people about their safety and bring peace of mind. In defiance of UN Security Council resolutions, North Korea has forged ahead with its missile and nuclear weapons programs and has repeatedly threatened to destroy the U.S., Japan, and South Korea.
Iraqi commanders have been warning for weeks that ISIS would blow up the Al-Nouri mosque rather than see it handed over to Iraqi forces. This is where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the creation of the so-called Islamic State in 2014, taunting the West. Tonight, the Iraqi military said they got to within 50 yards of the 12th century mosque when ISIS blew it up and its iconic leaning minaret. Almost immediately, ISIS claimed that it was hit by a U.S. airstrike, denied by the U.S. military here. It's taken 7 long months for Iraqi forces to get inside the old city in Mosul. Now, blowing up the mosque does not signal the end of ISIS in Iraq, but it does suggest we're down to the final stretch with ISIS taking such drastic measures.
The number of terrorist attacks across Western Europe linked to the so-called Islamic State group are on the rise. The UK, France and Belgium appear to be the countries most targeted by IS detachments or solo operatives. All three are actively involved in the anti-Daesh coalition in both Syria and Iraq. The US is by far and away the largest contributor, though France is second in terms of military strikes and third in the number of resources, with naval, air and ground forces deployed. Britain is also active, with special forces in situ. Belgium contributes a vessel and aircraft, but as the symbolic capital of Europe, Brussels is vulnerable. Since 2014, Daesh has been under the coalition Kosh. Its caliphate straddling Iraq and Syria has been eroded, and now the endgame is in sight, with Mosul close to capitulation and Raqqa under assault. The jihadists are exporting their doctrine and bloody carnage across Europe to attack liberal values and behaviour. Many foreign fighters have fled the coalition assaults and returned to their countries of origin to continue the fight at home.
New French President Emmanuel Macron has cautioned that his country may be repeating the same mistakes in Syria that it did when it intervened in Libya back in 2011.
France did not participate in the war in Iraq, and this was right, but she was mistaken when she entered the war in Libya. What are the results of these two invasions? Destroyed states in which terrorist groups thrive. I do not want this to happen again in Syria.
Well, Macron highlighted that he no longer sees the removal of Assad as an absolute priority and called for a diplomatic solution. He also named terrorism as the most pressing issue surrounding Syria and called on countries to unite in the fight against it.
The FBI is investigating an attack at the airport in Flint, Michigan today as an act of terrorism. A police lieutenant was stabbed in the neck by a man ranting about people being killed in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
We got a 55-year-old male. He's an officer down at Bishop Airport. Somebody approached him with a large hunting knife and slashed the right side of his neck.
It was just past 9:30 this morning inside the airport's main terminal when a man, reportedly shouting "God is great" in Arabic, stabbed Airport Police Lieutenant Jeff Neville in the neck. David Gellius is an FBI special agent in charge.
And he made a statement, something to the effect of, "You have killed people in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and we are all going to die."
Police identify the attacker as 50-year-old Amour Fatoué from Quebec, who is now in custody.
We don't believe that anyone was involved with this individual. We have no information to suggest a wider plot, but it's certainly very, very early in the investigation. At this time, we view him as a lone wolf attacker.
The man was wrestled to the ground. The airport was immediately shut down and evacuated.
I saw a cop and he was down and there was a whole bunch of blood everywhere. Yeah, it was everywhere.
FBI officials say the suspect expressed his hatred for the United States.
A new ISIS leader has emerged in northern Afghanistan. Aziz Zola is the son of a Uzbek jihadi leader. He was reportedly released from the infamous Bagram prison last year.
He is the most evil man in the world. It is because of him that we starve here in poverty. He brought his terrorists to our homes and murdered everyone.
Until recently, he was incarcerated in Bagram prison. Then came his unexpected and unexplained release.
He's an international terrorist. It was American soldiers who released him from Bagram for whatever reason. They let him go, and now he has come for our lands.
Azizullah fed on the chaos and corruption in Afghanistan in his rise.
He's the richest man I know. He has support from abroad and so much money. He pays his fighters almost $1,000. That's why so many join him.
For reference, that's about 5 times more than Afghan soldiers are paid, a tempting sum. Refugees say corrupt Afghan army troops sell Azizullah the weapons he needs. All the locals and fighters we've spoken to say the same thing. The Afghan army sits idle, selling weapons to Azizullah.
On Wednesday, a U.S. lawmaker said he had introduced a bill to make it legal for senators and representatives to carry guns anywhere in the country, except the U.S. Capitol building. Representative Jody Hice of Georgia warned that members of Congress have a bullseye on our backs. He said his proposal was a step to safeguard the personal safety of lawmakers in light of recent events. This seemed to be in reference to an attack last week in which a gunman opened fire on Republican members of Congress practicing for a charity baseball game.
We see signs of missing people everywhere. They are not in the hospitals. We've not been told that they traveled out of the country. They were all in that building and they died in that building. We need the truth. The truth should be told. Let people know that they've lost their loved ones. Let them start getting on with what they need to do.
On Wednesday, the Court of Justice of the European Union ruled that courts may consider vaccines to be the cause of an illness, even if there's no scientific evidence confirming a link. The EU's highest court said that if the development of a disease is timely to the person's receiving a vaccine, that may serve as enough proof. The ruling added that courts must ensure that evidence is sufficiently serious, specific, and consistent to warrant the conclusion.
The U.S. is currently a dominant force in scientific research, but China could surpass the U.S. by 2022. By 2015, China was spending the second most of any country on biomedical research and development. But it's not come without its controversies. Fabrication in Chinese research has been a problem. One international medical journal recently retracted 107 Chinese-authored articles in one of the biggest ever cases of fake peer reviewing. To combat this, China changed interpretations of its criminal code. Individuals who fabricate clinical drug trials may be stuck with up to a 10-year prison sentence. They've even executed individuals who've messed with testing. In 2007, China executed its top food and drug regulator because he had taken bribes to approve untested drugs. China has also approved experiments that other countries may find ethically gray. In the next few months, doctors in China will start the country's first clinical trials with human embryonic stem cells.